got John Watson. He's going to be talking about driving Windows infrastructure with Puppet. So for you folks who've got Windows running out there, what is it, Air Worldwide over there? Yeah, you're excited. So, excellent. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. I feel kind of weird, like I'm the only Windows guy here, so does anybody use Windows with Puppet?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
You're not the only one.
That's cool. All right. So what about my, the other thing that's weird about me is that I'm a developer. I'm not an admin. I'm not a IT infrastructure type person. I approached Puppet as a developer looking for ways to automate applications and infrastructure. So it's really kind of like, I think of it as coming at the DevOps from the dev side of things. So I may do things a little differently than what you expect, but hopefully we can meet somewhere in the middle. First, I want to talk a little about just general Windows infrastructure, and then go on to some application-specific examples, and then a few miscellaneous topics, and then some wrap-up at the end. If anybody wants me to stop, I'm okay, because I've got the slides to follow, so feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, throw something at me. So let's start talking about infrastructure. Unlike Linux, we don't have things like Kickstart and Pixie Boot and all those fancy things, and so you can't just spin up a Windows box in 30 seconds. It just doesn't work like that. If you've ever tried installing, because I actually have some environments that are still using Windows 2008, and I think we're up over 100 Windows updates, and usually it takes a long time to get them all applied. So one of the first things I learned to do was to set up base images. Basically, working in this infrastructure world, you want to have a base image which is just the OS only, maybe a service pack, but that's it. Just take that base image, and once you've made it for that particular OS and hypervisor, then you shut it down and use that to clone from and make new ones. And I put a special note in there about using sysprep, because sysprep is a Windows command, facility, whatever, application that will prepare the machine. It's actually what OEMs use when you buy them from preloaded from a computer. So the idea is that when you sysprep a machine, it sets it up so that during the boot it gets a new SID, a new unique machine ID, and it also prepares it with a new computer name so that as soon as you bring up the OS, you're ready to go. And then after you've got your base images, that's where you start to look at what you can do with Puppet. And a lot of people, or I shouldn't say a lot of people, some people may not realize just how much Puppet can do with Windows. There's at least a dozen or more resource types. These are your basic building blocks. These are below the modules. These are the things that Puppet can manage and watch and control and configure. So obviously the big ones are files, users, and groups, and that can be local accounts or Active Directory. Packages, services. We're going to look at quite a few of these. The ones on the bottom are actually, the ones in yellow are specifically supported by Puppet. Some of the other ones are community contributed ones. They're still pretty good and they can be used. And just to show you as an example, the scheduled task one you see on the right is one that it's quite powerful and capable. So this is really your task scheduler in Windows, and you can manage it with a Puppet syntax. Something new that's come out is Puppet Labs has created this module called Windows, and it's not actually a module, but it's more like a meta module or a package of modules. It together has about, 6 or 8, maybe 8 different kinds of modules all wrapped up. And it used to be you had to go find and hunt all the pieces you wanted. Well, now you can install just Puppet Labs Windows, or do a Puppet module install, like you can see the screenshot there. And you'll get all these modules installed at once. And of course, these modules are designed to fit and work together. They're at the right versions. They interoperate well, so you don't have to worry about dependencies and things like that. So it's kind of a really cool thing. So in my experience, that's the first thing you want to do to your master is to grab your Puppet Labs Windows. Once you've got that in place, then you can start to do more and more with it. And one of the cool features, and this is really where you start to open up how you're able to manage and drive Windows, is that you're able to support Windows features. That is, you can use Puppet to install and configure Windows roles and features just like you do with the GUI. And now, going back to what Greg was talking about earlier, I've set up some core roles and profiles. These are basic bits of functionality that use the modules that we looked at a moment ago to actually provision out a database server, domain controllers, web servers, whatever you need to do. Here's an example. Can everybody see the code? It looks like it's pretty big. Is it good enough? Here's a profile class called Common, which puts some basic functionality. In this case, I like to install the sysinternals tool set to have on the machine so you can get access to all those nice tools for being able to diagnose things if you ever have to go remote into the box. Also, notice what's highlighted too. There's a provider called Chocolatey, which we're going to talk about some more. And then a few other things you can do. We're actually able to set up things so we make sure that the machine is somewhat locked down in terms of PowerShell by setting the execution policy to all sign, because the first thing that somebody does when they get on the box and try to run PowerShell is they go and look up on how to do it set to unrestricted so they stop getting bugged. This turns it back on again, make sure that public's going to keep it turned on. Even if somebody turns it off, it'll come back around and turn it on again. And then the last one is one that took me a little bit of digging to find, but it was allowed me to do pings. So it opens up the firewall to allow pings to go through. Because as you're moving around between boxes, especially when you're doing the puppet master and going back and forth, you want to be able to see, do I have connectivity? So this is a common set of code that I would apply to about any box I'm going to use. Next is another base class called web server. And what this does, and again, it's following the profiles pattern, this expands on the basic profile class by allowing you to establish a web server. And you notice one of the things I did here was I'm using the operating system release so that I can tell that this is, say, for example, a Windows 2012 box, or maybe I could do it for 2008. I think that's about as far back as you can go. This is just a little bit of a kind of developer coding trick so that in the future, if I have to add a new version or new OS, it becomes a little easier to do. I've already got the code structure in place just to pop it in. But the actual details for what happens in the web server is being delegated down to this other class that you can see in the middle here. Let's see if we can. Right there, this Windows 2012 R2, which we'll look at next. Here what we've got going on is we've got a generic web server, and here you also see that Windows feature. It's one of those built-in types, so I use this piece of Puppet code that I didn't have to write, I just used right away. And I'm going to have a feature called IIS, and I'm listing all the sub-features that are going to be installed and configured. How many times have you had screenshots to go through to say, click this one, click that one, click this one, make sure you get it right. Now you can define it once in code and be assured that you always get the same configuration everywhere you go. In fact, the Windows feature has a combination of about 50 sub-features that you can install and configure. Are there any questions? Am I going too fast? Yeah, go ahead.
On the last slide, I just want to point out, I've been bitten by not creating a proper else for your default case.
Okay.
I think it's critical and you did a good job of doing the notify there.
Yeah.
And you can also do a fail. I did a fail in the message, but I think it's critical that everybody it should be in your final else or in your case that it says it falls failing to notify. Because if that parameter is not set, then you can end up.
They just fall through. Keep going. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little try to be a little judicious with the fails because I always try to obviously you want to notify somebody what's going on, but do you want to crash it out and cause it to stop? You got to kind of weigh that. It's like I look at it this way: if I can't install a web server, do I want to just blow up the whole thing, or do I just want to let them know that I can't do it, but at least other things may run? It's something you have to weigh. Once you've set up these these classes, you can set up rules. I'm actually jumping ahead a little bit, but here I'm actually using Foreman. I don't know if it's actually better if I can do this. I have to confess that I haven't done much presenting with my Mac, so I don't know if I can do this. I guess I'm in present mode, so maybe not. I will, when we get done to the end, I'll bring up, I've got some Vagrant boxes running, or excuse me, virtual boxes running. This is the open source version with Foreman, and we're using the Foreman web UI to classify the nodes. In this case, I've got a box called Vagrant 2012 R2, and I'm assigning Puppet classes to it. You notice here, this kind of highlighted thing. Here I've got a list of roles that I defined, and there's a role web server, which we were just looking at. Actually, we're looking at the profile. The role just includes the web server. And again, I'll show you that code in a bit. We assign it to that thing. Next time Puppet runs, it's going to apply those classes. So in effect, those Windows features are going to be defined and put on the box. And you can actually see this starting to happen here. And you notice this little pop-up here. This is actually, the underlying tool, I believe, is DISM, was it deployment, imaging, servicing, whatever that thing is called. But it's basically using the standard Windows underlying commands and facilities to bring in the Windows features. And once that's done, you can see up here on the left, this is Server Manager, those roles and features were added. And just to kind of prove it out too, there's an INET pub, so this is an ordinary Windows box. There's no magic or anything special. It's doing what you would have to do by hand, but you're able to put it in code with just a few lines and start to manage things in this way. Any questions? Thoughts? Anybody else doing this kind of stuff?
Does Chocolatey have to be installed before, or is that just an available provider?
Why don't you go back to, so one of the resource types is called a package, and in Windows, Windows and Puppet, the default Puppet package provider is actually MSIs or EXEs. So that's kind of like they're built in Windows. There are two additional providers which I recommend using. One is Chocolatey and the other one is PowerShell. So if you add those two resource types, then you can start to write your code to depend on that. So that's kind of one of the things I do. I actually have a little bootstrap script. Remember when I said I do a base OS? You could even have Puppet install Chocolatey for you and then have everything else built on that as long as you set your dependencies and it requires. Then you can manage it. Is anybody not familiar with Chocolatey? Chocolatey is a very cool little tool. It's billed as apt-get for Windows, so it gives you command line install functionality without having to go hunting websites or running MSIs and all that stuff. It uses PowerShell. So you could have actually what you can do is really cool because for example, I built up a virtual box here, and I just had one little PowerShell script that had a bunch of Chocolatey instructions. That one little script, and I blew in a bunch of boxes, a bunch of applications, a bunch of things, all with just some simple commands without having to do anything. That actually doesn't even need Puppet. So that facility of being able to do that, you could go back and do it right now with your, just with an ordinary machine. Puppet can take advantage of that. And the cool thing is the guy who wrote it actually works for Puppet now, so it's getting a lot of support and love. And I would actually say, I haven't seen them change MSI in years. I don't think anybody likes MSIs. If you've ever written an MSI, you don't ever want to write one again. Does anybody know what Workday is? Okay, I got 2 or 3 hardcore people, yeah, so you don't want to go to that level. It's not pretty. Excuse me?
Just flashbacks.
Yeah. Worker was a tool. Worker is a tool that comes with the Windows SDK and allows you to crack open an MSI file to see what it is inside. And the thing a lot of people don't know is an MSI is actually its own internal portable database format. So it's like looking at SQL Server and seeing a bunch of tables and a bunch of cross-references in there. You go blind trying to look at this stuff.
But it's very useful if you're planning on using Puppet with an MSI with these parameters.
That's right, yeah.
Set up a transform file and just say that.
Yep, that's one way to do it. It's matter of fact, where I'm working, we've been talking. I've been referring to those as legacy installers, just so we start to label them and push them out of the way. We're kind of focusing on doing everything that we can new using Chocolatey. That gives you the ability to do it from a command line independent, but also if your app and your stuff as environment is running in a Puppet managed world, the same set of code can be used to install automated or by hand. So that's kind of our model going forward. Database servers are pretty much the same. I don't really kind of want to go and bore you showing the same old code. Unfortunately, there's really only 2 choices. Until recently, there was one choice, and that choice was you're still dealing primarily with SQL Server. Now, if you got MySQL, it's an MSI, and that's pretty easy to automate. SQL Server is tricky because you have to use that auto on a 10 file, and you have to fill that out. Which also means you have to have the SQL installer, which means you have 2 to 3 to 4 gigabytes of install code that you have to have mounted and available for Puppet to launch and execute, because it's basically doing what you would do by hand. So there's not too much you can do. Microsoft is not helping along that way when it comes to automating SQL Server. However, I do know that Puppet has released a new module called SQL Server. Unfortunately, it's in the Enterprise Edition only, so I have not personally experimented with it yet. And I'm not sure of the capabilities. I don't know, has anybody here used it? Share any light on that? No? It seems kind of promising, but one of the tricks that I've used for SQL installs is to take and create the N10 file and then turn it into an ERB, an embedded Ruby template file. So that way there you can parameterize things like the service accounts and the passwords and the SA account and those kind of features, and perhaps even drive them with Hiram. But basically there's not a whole lot you can do with SQL Server. Domain controllers are the same way. They're a little bit trickier. There are some modules on the Forge. I've always, personally, I'm on the fence a little bit because, you don't spin up normally DCs all the time, several times a day, everywhere. This is one of the kind of strange boxes. You need one, you set it up, and it's up and running. You don't do much with it. What you do is create accounts and groups. But as far as actually making a domain controller, that's why I said that's, you got to always kind of weigh the cost benefit. Do you really want to automate that? Unless you're in a situation where you're maybe, an application, enterprise app developer, and you're, using domains all the time. I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of benefit. So then let's talk about some applications. I'm not able to share any of the code that I have at work, so what I try to do is put together something relatively reasonable. And I went to the ASP.NET website, and there's a relatively recent application for showcasing MVC user interface along with Entity Framework. So what I did was I took that application, downloaded the source code, and then I augmented it so it looked like what I would call a real production type development application, which means basically, if you look at this thing, this folder called Contosa University, that's Microsoft's. That's pretty much it. Most of the other stuff here is stuff I add. So really, what you typically want to do, this is how I took an existing ASP.NET application and I built it up so that it could be driven off of a build machine like Jenkins, or you could wrap it up and make it into a Chocolatey package, which is something I thought I would just touch on briefly. Some of the tools we used were this build PS1 file is using a tool called Saki, which is a PowerShell make-like utility. It has build tasks built in it. There's another application or another PowerShell module called PS Build, which is actually written by the guy who wrote the Inside MS Build book, because he works on the MS Build team. Well, he's created a wrapper project called PS Build, so you could do builds from PowerShell. And a few little batch files. But the interesting thing really is, how do I take an app and make it a Chocolatey installer? There's really only a couple things you got to do. You got to create a new spec file, which is just a small XML file with the name and manifest information. And then you need to have an installer. It has to be called Chocolatey install.ps1, and it has to reside in the tools folder. So after you build it, and this is what you see. So up here, you can see in our staging folder, there's where the package was created, and inside of that tools folder there is the Chocolatey install PS1. A NuGet package. NuGet is a packaging technology. It is to .NET what I think JARS or Maven is to the Java world. It's actually a zip format. There is a nice little utility called the NuGet Package Explorer, which will crack it open and display it in a friendly manner. It actually makes you an empty one if you wanted to create one by hand. So just to kind of wrap up, you can take any old application and with very little effort, you can turn it into a Chocolatey package, which can then be installed from the command line. Now, what I could do in about 10 to 15 minutes, I challenge anybody here, I don't care how good you are, because you're still waiting for Install Shield to load before you can even think about trying to write an MSI, and I'll be done and installed and going off to have beverages. Any questions? So I'm going to run through these slides and I'll jump over and look at some code if people are interested. A couple of miscellaneous things. One you've already called me on, and that was the package providers. Here's an example which I just stole right from the Puppet docs. The top one here, you can see we're invoking an MSI, and all you say is package, name the source, and install options are where you pass your switches for like a silent install. And the lower one, we're doing an install of just an executable. So if you compare that to Chocolatey, they're roughly the same. The only difference is I could have either one of these become Chocolatey or PowerShell by adding a provider equals. I could say provider equals Chocolatey, and then I include the name of the Chocolatey package I wanted to run. I could say provider equals PowerShell, and I could name a PowerShell script or even inline code and have it execute that. So it really doesn't matter what the provider is. It's more a question of what you want to use and what your development teams want to support. You know, you could spend thousands for Install Shield. You could, stumble on the open source project called Wix and try to write XML in Notepad. Whatever floats your boat. But I've done. Yes.
I don't think that the source, somebody was derived out to them.
Apparently, yeah.
Of course, we know that you would want to do that on a study everybody else though.
Yeah. Right.
It always can be fun to just
There is a good thing there's a good point in there inherent in that. When you're writing this stuff, you're thinking about it. You have to remember that you're writing this Puppet code. It's actually getting put onto the master, but you're writing it in the context of this is executing on the Windows machine, so everything is relative. So her point is there may not be an end drive on the machine you're running on, in which case this will fail. So you have to do a little bit better than that. Another thing I ran across as I was exploring and doing things with Puppet has to do with facts. And turns out that not all environment variables, because I was writing some code where I wanted to use environment variables, and they're not accessible. So the factor will set up some variables as facts, but not all environment variables. In my case, what I wanted to do is, for example, make the code a little more resilient, and I'll show you that in a second. So I found this piece of code by a gentleman named Tim Dysinger. It's just a tiny little piece of Ruby code. And all it does is spin through the environment. And for every environment variable, it surfaces it as a fact. And it does so by prepending it with env. The cool thing is once that's done, whether you're in open source Informant or you're in the Puppet Enterprise console, you can see all these environment variables and you see them here. So these are env underscore. These are all the Windows environment variables which are surfaced to you. The reason I was interested in that is because I wanted to make my Puppet modules in code a little more flexible, and I didn't want to hardcode the path to where the Chocolatey install might be. And so when you install Chocolatey on the machine, it creates an environment variable to point to where it's located. I had no access to that in Puppet. I had no access to that. It wasn't surfaced as a fact. That led me into looking around, how can I get at environment variables, and I found this. So that simple little piece of code gives you all you need. Any questions?
Is that Ruby script go into the module or is it on?
Yeah, I'll show you that now. What I'm going to do is pop out of here. Let's see if I can do this.
So a follow-up to this question, with the custom facts of Windows, you have to set it to the same.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to do that. I guess, can I do it this way? This will be tricky. Oh boy. Is that legible to people? Sort of? Yeah. People mentioned a couple times, there's Geppetto, if you're a Windows guy and you don't like that typing on the command line all the time, there's actually a GUI you can use. Gosh, I almost can't see that. Let's say custom. Sorry. There you go. So in the modules folder, if you create custom lid factor, and then there's the environment Ruby script. It's the same script that I showed. It's just a tiny little piece of code. All I had to do was paste that in and put it in the right place. And as somebody mentioned, you have to say plugin sync equals true on the Puppet conf in your agent. And what that will do is cause these, because this is actually done as a factor as a plugin, this will actually cause this Ruby code to be sent down to the agent machine, to the Windows box, and then as part of the execution, this one will run and it'll pick up all the environment variables and send them back out as facts.
One of the things I've noticed, at least on the Linux side, is that if you try to run fact to get a custom fact, you have to run it with a dash
Yeah.
to go back and know the stuff. Is that the same on the Windows side?
I honestly haven't tried that.
Yes.
I haven't had to, but
Yes.
Yep.
Dash P is competing for pulling all the facts from plugin sync versus facts that are just running all the facts.
okay. Sounds like you.
Also, do you have any suggestions or pitfalls you ran into regarding using files versus templates, the Ruby templates on the Windows side?
Using files versus templates. I use them both. I'm not sure you're asking a question. You must have a situation.
Like on the Linux side, I'll do a template if there's general configs I need to pass it to. Just trying to ask, trying to look at Windows stuff.
Yeah. So what I've been
For
focusing.
some examples you would not want to use, say, a template that would be too complicated, the language.
Yeah, so what I've done, and what we're doing is, so if anybody's familiar with .NET applications, they have a configuration file, usually it's web config or app config. Normally, you got to find ways to get it, and you have to, write documentation and teach admins to go and edit those files and set their, the settings and programs. So this is a perfect use case for templates and Hira and environments, and that's what we've been doing. So we take our configs, turn them into ERBs, make them templates, and then we drive them with Hira. And that way there you can have, you may have different database settings, you may have different security settings, you may have different whatever paths, whatever you need that's changeable. So that's a good use case for that. One other trick that I do is, the thing with Chocolatey and trying to manage both worlds is that the trick that I came up with is I create a file called, usually like a properties file, name value pairs. And I have a Puppet class and a template that will actually spit that out by populating it from Hira. So that way when Chocolatey is running in a Puppet managed world, the values are coming from Hira. But if I'm testing that somewhere else in a non-Puppet world, I could just supply my own properties file with my own custom values, maybe for my dev machine or something like that. What are we doing here? What I'm going to show you is, that must be the right one. Oh, I have no idea what that is. Sorry. I've seen that. That's going to be it. There we go. How many people are using Foreman? A few? So most are using Enterprise? So this is Foreman 1.8 with Puppet, open source 3.8, 3.2 I think. Discovered something when I fired up the machine here because I'm on the Harvard network that I now have a new certificate for a new machine name, something I didn't expect. But a couple things to point out. One, first off, is the YAML. Let's see if I can make that bigger. What is this? Is this it? No. There we go. So this is the YAML for. Come on, get over here. for the external node classifier. So basically, that is a class that says, I should say web server. But this is just showing what we have for a external node classification from Foreman. And then the other thing we can do is, if we go and look at the node, you can see the facts, and you can tell the ones, like I said, so these are your standard Puppet ones in many cases. And then when we get down a little further, you'll start to see the END ones, which were serviced by the custom fact. So these are all available, they're accessible to Puppet, they're recorded in the database, and they're available in your code, so you can use local environment variables to help modularize your code and make it more flexible. The other thing that's interesting is if we, I figured out how to go back, I guess can I do it this way? Does this work? If we go back and edit the node, come on, hit that edit. Oh, good. So yeah, I finally made it to Harvard. Here we're seeing the Puppet classes that are available and configured on the machine. So in this case, because this is a new instance, I think that role's there. So here's how you would assign a role, a web server, to that class, or excuse me, to that node. So now that that's there, if I were to submit this, and then I'm going to get really dangerous and try something like this, which I guarantee I won't be able to see. I'll do this from memory. Actually, I don't need this, so what I need to do is go to my other machine. Sorry about that. Here we've got a Windows box. And notice this was a clean run because I realized that when I saw the cert peak generated again, I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. So now that I've assigned that node, or that role to that node, I should be able to run Puppet Agent again, and you'll actually see the class in action. So you'll see it pull down the code for the roles web server and apply it. This might actually take a couple of minutes. But if all goes well, we should see it start to apply these roles and features. Actually, they were already on the box, so it'll discover that they're there, and it should maybe end pretty quick. But now that I've changed the classification that I know to include the role web server, Puppet should take care of making that happen for me. So that's about it. Anybody have any questions? Anything else? Yes?
You mentioned when you created your base class to remove any patching. How do you handle patching? Do you use Puppet at all?
We haven't, so we're kind of more the dev shop side of things, so I haven't dealt with that truly as much, but what I found is that there's usually things that are in place, whether it's a WSDS server, the Windows Update server, or I guess people using SCOM, sometimes the System Center tool, so we haven't really kind of focused on that. We've been mostly trying to embrace and adopt Puppet as a development tool to aid in automation and standardization, and also ensuring that the applications that we write and deliver are themselves more resilient. So it's not just about the box, and again, it's not like an in-house set of boxes. I'm trying to make applications that I write and deliver a lot more robust. Yes?
Great job in putting the slides together. Two questions, one for Chris and one for you, John. If these slides are not protected by intellectual property rights, which I'm not sure,
I'll put them on SlideShare.
Would they be shared
Yep.
folks here?
Yep, and the code actually I have, it's some of the Puppet code I tweaked it last night, but I have that up on GitHub too. So there's nothing really special about that. It's just basic Puppet stuff.
Should we expect Chris to send an email, or we can give our personal email to you so that we can get the link?
Kelly, what's the process here?
For sharing information?
Yeah,
Slides.
slides,
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah, we'll make sure we put it on the site.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question actually. How did you get started? Like, what were some of the first things that you decided to puppetize?
Those are the first things. So I had put in for an internal R&D project to look at automating things. At the time, I was thinking to myself that, because, prior to this, we had a lot of teams installing a lot of applications on bare metal. And, if we got called in to troubleshoot something, you were guaranteed that it would not, we had so many unicorns running around that it was just crazy. You just never figure out what was going on. So originally I thought to myself, well, if I could come up with like an engineering delivered base VM that would just make things, go smoother. I think it was pretty quick in figuring out, and actually, the gentleman sitting there, we actually tried to send one of those VMs across the WAN, and it takes a long time to get 60 gigabytes across the country, apparently. Especially when you get retries in there, so that doesn't work so well. So the theory worked, but the actual implementation wasn't there. So as I started looking around, truth be told, I went to a Gartner conference, and they were talking about automation, and they mentioned these tools, and so in the whole DevOps movement, so I started looking into it, and I was on the fence between which product to use. I was kind of leaning towards Puppet, and then you guys just lucked out. It just so happened that I learned that another division was already using it. So I said, well, I'm not going to go try something else. So I just started digging into it, and once I, understood it, I figured out, what could be done. Then I started looking at ways. At first, it was just automating some of the infrastructure stuff. And then as I got more comfortable with what it was capable of, then I started to think about, okay, I can use this to automate our apps. And then from there, it's almost like you can embed Puppet as your management engine within your application. Yep.
So is Hyra built in with Foreman?
No, Hyra is part of Puppet. Foreman.
So, I guess managing the Hyra?
It does surface, it does integrate. So, and this is something we're actually just starting to explore now. With the classes, I didn't really get into this, but oops, am I doing it? There we go. I gotta get out of here. Go back to this guy. Let's see if I can find a class. Yeah, I think these are not parameterized, but there's this smart class parameter. Yeah, see, I don't have any parameterized at the moment. But, it will surface here. What you can do is, the way we're thinking of using this is some of our classes will have specific parameters. It might be, to turn, groups of features on and off. Those can be set in Hyra as a default, but the ops team wants to be able to override them in specific cases because they know the environment better than anyone. And that's where you can actually choose it. If there was a variable here, you can select it and say override, and then you can say use Puppet default. And with those two things set, what happens is if it's not overridden in the UI, then it goes out to the default, which in this case would be a higher lookup. If it is overridden, then you supply it. And this works, by the way, both with Foreman and with the console, because I've tested them both. So, in that way, it's kind of obviously the console is a lot more polished and put together very well. But, the same functionality I pretty much found is there.
How do you go about installing agents across your infrastructure? Are you pulling that into your actual
Base image? No, the problem, you got to remember that, the caveat with agents is you don't want an agent in a higher version.
Yeah.
So what we were doing is we actually have, there's another tool I didn't really talk about. You can even do it just plain on Chocolatey. There's another tool called Box Starter, which one of the Microsoft devs wrote. And we actually set up a Box Starter script to prepare our base. So we would, after we took our base image, cloned it, nothing on it, really truly is Windows only. Then the first thing they did was they ran a Box Starter script, and what that would do is it would install Chocolatey, it would install, I think we needed .NET 4, it made sure PowerShell 3 or higher was on the box, and it installed Puppet Agent. And it prompts for the node and the IP addresses. Right. And then that was it, it was off and running. So it's like you run one script, and, after installing, or after cloning, and then you're off and running. Then you go to the console and assign the roles. Yep.
Besides like the the simple initial like configuration steps to get Puppet Run to work. Is there any like more advanced things you have to do? Because I have yet to get Puppet Run to work from the UI or like from Puppet Kick. I've been just using Salt Stack to do the necessary thing.
What do you mean by Puppet Run?
Like remotely execute a Puppet Run.
So I haven't actually tried that with Foreman. I know you can do it with a console.
I like even when I try it from like Puppet Kick from the console because Puppet Run's like depreciated and the new version I do Puppet Kick, that's deprecated. That still does, it gives me a connection refusal thing, and like the Foreman also gives me weird things when I try it. I just didn't know if you had ever got it to work.
No, I hadn't got that far. We're kind of still in the tail ends of the dev phase and testing.
Might just be an issue with Windows, I'm not sure. Like Windows and Puppet Run.
One of the things I guess I didn't mention is one of the things I learned to do is after installing the agent, the very first thing I do, at least on a dev type of thing, is I like to immediately go and switch the service from automatic to manual, so you can control it while you're testing and making sure, once it's running, that's a different story, but that's the thing people forget. It always catches you because by default it installs to run automatic. Any other questions? Alrighty. Let's see if I can put these back up. Here's my contact info. If anybody has any questions, you can always shoot them my way. And like I said, I'll make these things available and let Kelly and Karen know. Thank you.